In the UK, it's very simple and quick and cheap to set up the loan, but you'll pay higher interest rates. In Spain, it could cost you 2–3% of the amount you're borrowing by way of administrative costs, but you'll get lower interest rates. Remember, though, the exchange rate risk if you're doing that. If you are borrowing in euro and you're paying back the loan from your pound sterling salary check, every time the euro changes in value against the pound, which it does every second of every day, so your mortgage payment will change. And it can be a lot of money over a period of time. If you do borrow, you will not be able to deduct the interest charges for your tax purposes in Spain, but you will in the UK. The notary, I've already mentioned, is a public official who's there to witness the signature of title deeds. He's not there to talk to you about mortgages, surveys, valuations, whose name should go on the title, how to save taxes, or any of those other things. He is no substitute for getting some proper legal advice. Another thing you'll come across is the community of owners. If you buy an apartment or a house that shares common facilities, such as, for example, 10 houses built round a pool which they share, then you will automatically become a member of a community of owners. And then you own your apartment or house, what we would call freehold, plus you own a share of those common facilities. So you own a tenth of the pool, a tenth of the parking area, a tenth of the tennis court. And then you and your fellow owners have the right to decide how they're managed. So you have a meeting every year and you say it's time we resurfaced the tennis court, it's time we repainted the outside of the building, fix a budget for it, and then you have to pay your share of those expenses. You also have to follow the rules of the community. And those rules are normally very sensible, designed to increase the quality of life for everyone who lives there. But sometimes they can be much more restrictive. Sometimes they might say things like no pets. No running a business from the premises. So it's a good idea to check out the rules before you buy into the complex. The legal steps are broadly the same as in this country. First, you choose a lawyer. Either you use a specialist firm such as us, or you go direct to a lawyer in Spain. You can't go to your ordinary high street English solicitor because they wouldn't have a clue where to start, not their job. Then in our case, we'll always talk to you about the best form of ownership. I've already said it's the most important decision you have to make. I'll come back to it later. What price do you put in the title deed? There has been a long tradition in Spain of under-declaration of prices. It is now dangerous to do that. If you are asked to do so, try to resist it. If you have no choice, we will talk to you about how the process can be managed as safely as possible, but it's better avoided. We then carry out various inquiries and produce a written report for you. You then sign the contract and pay across a deposit. We then sort out the mortgage. Normally, we will then grant power of attorney, and eventually the title is signed and the tax is paid and the title is registered. Cost of buying property in Spain is significantly higher than it is in the UK. Typically 10–11% of the value of the property will disappear in miscellaneous fees and taxes when you're buying a resale property. That's high by UK standards, but it's roughly the same as most other Western European destinations. Now, I've talked about ownership. Why is it so important? If you put the property in the wrong name, you will pay massively too much tax during your lifetime and on your death. And it's always expensive to put it right if you get it wrong at the outset. In the worst case scenario, the transfer into the proper owner can cost you 82% in transfer taxes and the legal expenses. So it doesn't bear thinking about. You need to get this right before you sign the documents. And don't underestimate the possible savings here. We dealt with a case recently where a lady was buying a property for £200,000. And by putting it in the most appropriate form of ownership, we saved her over £80,000 in tax. So these are big numbers. Lots of people can be the owner. You and your wife, a company, a trust, lots of options. For each of you in this room, only one of those options will make any sense, and the rest will be a complete waste of time. And equally importantly, each of the options would be the best option for somebody in this room today. And that's really it. Nothing to worry about buying a property in Spain. Thank you.
Really, really important advice from John there. Thank you for summarising that. Just a quick question. I mean, how many British people are actually buying in Spain?
At the moment, there are something like 2 million British people have an interest in a home in Spain, which is a huge number. I mean, that's the size of Leeds and Sheffield put together.
Fantastic. But it's still going on. Well, listen, lots more information from you coming up after the break when we're looking at some problems and how you can make sure that you avoid them. Join us after the break. Welcome back to the Ultimate Overseas Property Seminar. Now let's go back to John now, who's going to look at some of the problems associated with buying properties in Spain and how to avoid them.
Yes, thank you, Martin. In this session, we are going to look at the 12 most common problems that affect our clients buying property in Spain. I hasten to say in no particular order of significance. First one, misleading statements by estate agents. I could fill a whole hour talking about horror stories along this line. This house has fantastic views, but there's a house going to be built in front of it next week. New golf course going to be built just down the road, if only. 5 minutes to the beach by Concord, and so on. I'm sure that many estate agents are very honest and very professional, but the only safe working assumption is that every time they open their mouths, they're lying. Prove the contrary. If I'm buying a house in Dubai and they tell me the sun is shining, I would want to go and check. That isn't to say that they're all dishonest. They're not. Most of them will tell you the truth most of the time. But if you rely on their statements and they turn out to be false, you have very little comeback. Second problem, the seller doesn't actually own what they're selling. Happens surprisingly often. XYZ Limited are the developers who are selling the property, but when we do a land registry check, it belongs to Paco Gonzalez. Why is that? Well, there may be a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe he sold it to the company, they haven't registered the change of ownership to avoid paying the taxes. Maybe there's a less innocent explanation. We need to check it out. And what we need to guide you on is whether this is a purely technical problem, which can be resolved, or whether it's evidence of fraud, in which case you should walk away and buy something else. Number 3, building without planning consent. This is a major problem in Spain. There is still a mentality in much of the areas of Spain where you're likely to want to buy that says build first and get the paperwork sorted out later. Remember that 30 years ago, these were very poor, almost third world areas with ill-educated peasants who are now multi-millionaire peasants but still have that same attitude to authority. The solution: are you prepared to walk away from the deal? There are lots and lots of properties that are perfectly legitimate with all the right paperwork. If you're not prepared to walk away because you think it's a spectacular bargain or because you've fallen in love with it, then we need to carry out some checks. Is the application genuinely pending and there's a hold-up? Is the area actually zoned for building? And is there a reasonable prospect that the project will get permission? But even then, there are no guarantees. Number 4, unfair contracts. Some of the contracts we see coming out of Spain are truly appalling. They take away all of your legal rights. The solution to that, of course, is that your lawyer should alert you, first of all, to words that have hidden meanings, because sometimes the meaning is not obvious, but more importantly, the lawyer will alert you to what is not in the contract. It's sometimes the things that are not said that do you the maximum amount of damage. Number 5, lack of detail in the specification of new properties. This is getting a great deal better, but even today the specifications tend to look rather thin by Northern European standards. You have to accept that you will not get the same type of specification as you would if you were buying a new home here in the UK or in Ireland. You won't get a full specification. But if the specification is too thin, then we should try to negotiate some more detail to clarify whether you're getting marble floors or concrete floors, expensive German kitchen or cheap Spanish kitchen. Number 6, Payment by letterers. Letterers are bills of exchange. They're a bit like post-dated checks. This is now less of a problem than it was in the past, but still happens. They are a disaster. Try to avoid them. They lead to all sorts of complications. If you do have to pay by letterers, your lawyer must explain to you exactly what's involved in the process and the penalties for any failure to follow the rules. And you always must make sure that there's enough money in your Spanish bank account to meet the payments, because if there isn't and the payment bounces, all hell breaks loose. Number 7, under declarations of the price, black money. As I said earlier on, until recently no one ever used to declare the full value. It was considered unmacho. It was the national sport, fiddling the taxman. That's gone. But even today, you'll be under pressure to underdeclare in some places. Try to avoid it. If you must underdeclare because you've fallen in love with a house and the seller simply won't sell to you unless you do, then we will explain to you what's involved, what the risks are, and how to minimize those risks. But the main way of minimizing the risk is never get involved in declaring ridiculously small amounts, less than 60, 70, 80% of the price. Better, though, declare the full amount. Number 8, no bank guarantees. For over 40 years now, the law of Spain has required developers to give you a bank guarantee if they want to take your money before they give you the keys. Some of them refuse to do it. And if they do refuse and they go bust, you will lose your money. We will always try and get a guarantee. If we can't persuade them to give one, we'll discuss the options with you. But frankly, the best option is to go and buy from somebody else. Now in Spain, there is a compulsory 10-year insurance guaranteeing the structure of the building. And some developers are reluctant to give you that because it's expensive. And they will try all sorts of devices to try and find loopholes in the rules. One to be aware of is where they want you to buy the land and then contract with them to build the house on what is now your land. That makes you the developer, not them. You then have to get the insurance policy and pay for it. And if you don't, you'll find it almost impossible to sell the house. Number 10, completing before you get your habitation certificate. In Spain, the law requires that all new houses come with a piece of paper saying they're fit to live in. And very often, the builder will try you to get to sign the final title before that's been issued. Very often because there are significant delays in the department that issues those certificates. What do we do about it? Well, first of all, you need to understand what the risk is. The risk is that if you buy without a habitation certificate, the builder may never get round to getting the habitation certificate. Worse still, that property may have been built in breach of the planning design, with the result he can't get a habitation certificate. And in the worst case scenario, you can then find that your house is bulldozed. So you've now bought a very expensive patch of bare ground. The solution, don't agree to it. If you're in an area of Spain where this is universal practice, and there are some, then make sure that you hold back a substantial part of the price until that certificate is issued, because that's then his incentive to get it sorted out. Number 11, buying off plan. The key point to understand here is that not all property makes you money. Well-purchased property, property that's in the right location, the right design, will still, even in today's climate, make money in Spain. But if you buy the wrong property in the wrong place, it simply won't work for you. And so the solution to that is that you buy well. You buy the best properties in the best development within your price range. You think about who is going to want to buy this property from me when I want to sell it and why. And most importantly, never, never, never buy off-plan if selling it before completion is your only exit route. If you haven't got the money to complete and you must sell, then you will lose your money. We have a whole load of Irish clients in that situation at the moment. The Irish have a different perspective from the British. The Irish tend to go along to a development and say, I like that, I'll have 20 of them, on the basis that they can sell 15 and the profit they make on the 15 will pay for the other 5. worked beautifully when prices were going up a lot, but if you've paid a 40% deposit on 20 units and you can't afford to complete, you are now faced with writing off your 40% or selling as a fire sale. And there are some spectacular bargains as a result at the moment. Number 12, the Valencian land grab. Now, this is immensely complicated, and I've got about a minute to cover it. We think of Spain as a country, which indeed it is, but it is also a collection of self-governing regions. And there are certain aspects of the law where those regions have the right to make their own rules rather than follow national rules. And one of those aspects of the law is planning. And the region of Valencia, back in 1994, passed a law which differed from the law in the rest of Spain. For the best of motives, they wanted to speed up the process, and it worked well for a number of years until somebody saw a loophole. And that loophole permits a greedy and corrupt developer working hand in hand with a greedy and corrupt town hall official effectively to steal the land of people in that area. Now, of course, that's got Spain into a lot of hot water. There have been court cases brought about it, and the courts in Spain are essentially saying it's an illegal practice. They've been taken to the European Commission for Human Rights, and they have also declared that it's an illegal practice and it must be put right. And as a result, the region of Valencia issued a new law last year. But the new law doesn't remove the whole of the problem. It goes about 80% of the way there, but it doesn't remove the whole thing. So what's the solution? This is only a problem if you're buying land in the region of Valencia, which is crudely the Costa Blanca. It's only a problem if you're buying rural property, not property that's fully developed. And it's generally only a problem if you're buying rural property adjacent to something that's already being developed. So if you're in any of those three categories, and especially if you're in two or more of them, get some very specific legal advice about what the risks are and how to avoid them. And that's really it. As I said earlier on, we are not wanting to make you worry about buying property in Spain. It is a perfectly safe and sensible thing to do, providing you're making the right elementary precautions when you do so. It's not something to be frightened about, it's something where you need to be aware of what the risks are. Thank you.
Fantastic. Very worthwhile advice again, John. I mean, isn't it true in lots of ways? It can be summed up by saying sometimes people just leave their brain at the airport when they get on the plane.
One of my colleagues has a theory that it's something in jet fuel and that it sort of numbs your brain for a 2-week period.
Because people do things when they're buying abroad sometimes that they wouldn't dream of doing if they were buying a house in Stockport or London.
I have a client who is an accountant who is such a tight man, he would not normally buy a box of paper clips without getting the Which report. And he spent £365,000 on a house that had no title.
There you go. Join us after the break for more information. Welcome back to the Ultimate Overseas Property Seminar with the award-winning property lawyer John Howell. Now it's time to find out all about property taxation in Spain. John.
Thank you, Martin. For some reason, tax seems to really interest most of our clients buying property in Spain. Personally, I find it fairly boring, but they seem to be fixated about the question of how much tax will I have to pay if I buy a home in Spain or move to Spain. Most countries have similar rules to decide where and what taxes you're going to pay. The actual taxes, of course, vary enormously from one country to the next. The amount of tax you pay and the basis upon which you pay it is determined mainly by whether you are deemed to be a tax resident in that country or not. Now, who is a tax resident? Well, in the case of Spain, they have a number of rules, and if you are caught by any of those rules, you are treated as tax resident in the country. The most important and common one is a rule called the 183-day rule. And what that says is if you spend more than 183 days in the year in Spain, whether in one chunk or lots of little bits, then you are treated as tax resident in the country. And of course, 183 days is 6 months. Another rule is the centre of economic interest rule. If your centre of economic activity is Spain, then you will be treated as tax resident in Spain, even if you spend less than 183 days there. And there are a number of other rules as well, which I haven't got time to go into today. Now, the effect of being tax resident, in principle, is that you shake hands and say goodbye to the British taxman, and you're welcomed with open arms and a big embrace by the Spanish taxman, because in future you'll be paying all of your taxes in Spain. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because there are some taxes you'll still have to pay in this country. For example, tax on the income you get from real estate in this country will always be taxed here. But the principle is you're moving from the UK to Spain, and therefore your tax base changes. Paperwork doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you've got a piece of paper that says you're resident in Spain or whether you're simply staying there illegally as a tourist. The day your head hits the pillow for that 184th time is the day you're caught for taxes. Now, as a non-resident, as a person who has a holiday home or investment property in Spain, basically you won't have much contact with the Spanish taxman. You'll have to pay your local property taxes, the equivalent of rates or council tax, normally very low, £200 a year perhaps on a typical apartment. You'll have to pay income tax to the Spanish government on any income you generate from your home in Spain. International tax law says that income from the rental of property is taxed in the country where the property is located first and foremost. So in Spain, you pay tax at a flat rate of 25%, no allowances, and in particular, no ability to deduct your mortgage interest charges. You then have to declare that income again in the UK or Ireland or wherever you live, and the British taxman will give you a credit for the tax you've already paid in Spain, so you don't pay the same tax twice. And in practice, even if you're a 40% taxpayer, because of all the allowances you can claim in this country, including the mortgage costs, you will find that you seldom pay any more tax than the tax you've already paid in Spain. Capital gains tax, the same basic principle applies. You declare it in Spain, 35% of the gain is paid in tax, with only fairly small deductions allowable. That's likely to reduce shortly. Spain recognises it's uncompetitive at the moment on capital gains tax. And you then declare that gain again in the UK, and again you get a credit for the tax you've already paid in Spain. In Spain, they have a horrible tax called wealth tax, where every year you have to pay a percentage of your accumulated wealth in tax. It's only a tiny percent, 0.2%, and it only applies to the assets you have in Spain, not to your worldwide assets, unless you're resident in Spain. So it's not a problem for most of us. And then finally, when you die, someone is going to end up paying some inheritance tax on the value of your assets in Spain, and you'll also have to declare that inheritance here in the UK and pay whatever tax might be due here. But frankly, by that stage, you don't care. If you are going to live in Spain, it's an entirely different picture, because then you become liable to pay taxes on your worldwide income, your worldwide assets, your worldwide capital gains, and so on. And so you have to understand that that means precisely what it says: your worldwide assets, your worldwide income. You cannot have £10 million in this country, put 9 million into the Channel Islands, go to Spain and pretend you've only got £1 million. If you do that and you get caught, the effect is horrible, because the Spanish taxman does not then come to you and say, you have been a naughty boy. You have not paid me the 0.2% tax that you owed me on this 9 million quid. He will start off by saying, congratulations, because they've got a good sense of humour. Congratulations, when you filled in your tax return last year, you only had £30,000. I now find you've got 9 million in the Channel Islands. The only way you can have got that is by earning it in the current year of assessment, because you wouldn't have lied to me last year, would you? I am therefore going to charge you to tax on that income at 45%, plus, of course, a penalty for late payment and interest. Now, anybody who runs the risk of that happening to save 0.2% is a fool. Now, of course, it doesn't end there, because you don't end up paying that tax. We cut a deal with the taxman and negotiate around it, but you end up paying a great deal more tax than you would have had to pay if you'd done it properly in the first place. You cannot hide your assets. How do we save tax? Well, one of the questions we're always asked is, how does the taxman know? There are no passport controls, there are no stamps, so how does he know I spent 200 days in Spain, not 160? And the answer is that very often someone will tell him, because there is a culture in all Latin countries of shopping your enemy to the taxman. Why? Because nobody pays the tax they owe, and nothing is going to cause you more grief than a tax inspection. So who is going to shop you? Well, the first candidate by miles is your wife when you divorce her, followed by a jealous next-door neighbour who, over a gin or two too many, you told you didn't pay any tax, and he pays everything he owes and is jealous, followed by the cleaner you've just fired. It is a very real danger. There is a very famous estate agent operating in Spain who got divorced not long ago, and shortly afterwards his company got a bill for nearly £2 million in unpaid tax that had somehow got lost between his accounting system and the tax office. Even if nobody does tell the taxman, it's really simple for him to know where you were, because he has access to all records. So if there's a computer record, you're dead in the water. Did you use the health service? Did you go through a speed camera? Were you on a passenger list for a boat or an aeroplane? Did you use your credit card? Did you use your mobile phone? Every one of those leaves a computer record. No problem finding out where you were. Now, you will go to the bars in Marbella, and they will say, don't listen to any of that nonsense, old boy. I've been here for 20 years, never paid a penny. And that's absolutely true, they haven't. But those days are over. September the 11th, terrorism, drugs, money laundering, put pay to all of that. You cannot hide. Now, if we want to save tax, then we have to decide on a strategy. My preferred strategy is to keep it simple. Some of my clients don't want to do that. Some of them want to have the most complicated strategies. They'll do anything to save a couple of pounds in tax. But basically, keeping it simple, I think, works best, because we understand it, you understand it, and you don't accidentally forget what we've done and then do something that undoes it all. You have to bear in mind the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance is legal. It's not paying any more tax than you have to pay. Tax evasion is illegal. It is hiding the tax that you should pay. You go to jail for tax evasion. You do not want to do that. Is it worthwhile? This is the question we keep on banging home to our clients. There is no point in spending £10,000 today, possibly to save £30,000 in inheritance tax 30 years down the road. It's not cost effective to do it. So we want to make decisions on tax planning that are financially worthwhile for you. But usually, by putting the property in the most appropriate names, and I come back to that yet again, by putting the property in the most appropriate names and a few other fairly simple devices, we can save you a great deal of money, whether you're buying a holiday home, an investment home, or a place to retire to. Anyway, summary. Buying a property in any country is complicated, as those of you who bought one in this country will know. Buying in the UK or in Ireland seems simple to you because you've done it before and because you're familiar with the language and the legal system. But it is, in fact, just as complicated, if not more complicated, than buying a house in Spain. If I was a Martian, I would find this country was at least as complicated as Spain. Don't panic about the problems. Most can be solved. And if you're buying for an investment, remember it's a business. You're not doing this because you like the house, you're doing it to make money. So you need to find out the facts, take advice, and that will dramatically improve the performance of your investment. And probably the most important tip of all, but you'd expect me to say this, always take genuinely independent legal advice when you're buying a property abroad. Someone who is acting for you and you alone and hasn't got any divided interests. A lot of our clients have made a great deal of money over the years from international real estate, and many of them, I'm sure, will continue to do so. But the ones who make money are the ones who go about it in a serious business-like fashion and don't just get on the aeroplane and buy the first property that the estate agent sells to him because he's told them that it's a spectacularly good deal. The last word, well, it is just as safe buying property in Spain as it is in your hometown. It is just as safe retiring to Spain as it is in your hometown, providing you're getting the right advice, legal, financial advice. And that's it. Thank you very much. We now have time for questions.
So, questions coming up after the break. But a quick one from me. A UK or a Spanish-based accountant?
It depends what you're trying to do. If you're wanting detailed advice about Spanish tax law, then a Spanish accountant is going to be the person to go to. If you're wanting advice about how to arrange your financial affairs generally, maybe you need to speak to both.
Great. Well, more information on our website, overseaspropertytv.com. Those questions coming up after the break. Welcome back to the final part of the Ultimate Overseas Property Seminar with property expert John Howell. Now it's time to take some questions from our studio audience. Who's got the first question?
Yes, I've been told that if I buy a house in Spain, I automatically become responsible for the seller's debts. Is this true?
Not really, no. It is technically true that if the seller has any debts that are registered against the property, then when you buy the property, you buy it subject to those debts. But if your lawyer's doing his job properly, one of the checks the lawyer will make will be to make sure that there are no such debts, or if there are any, enough money is kept back to pay off the debts so that they're cleared by the time you become the owner of the property. The only other thing you need to worry about is that if you buy a house and then for some reason your lawyer delays in registering your title, just leaves it in his desk drawer for a month, then there's always the danger that another debt is presented after the time when you buy it, but before your title is registered. So you need to make sure that the registration process is done as quickly as possible. Most notaries in Spain now will insist that that happens anyway, but some still don't.
Great. Next question.
Tell me, John, if I buy a property in Spain, do I have to use a Spanish lawyer, or can I use an English one? What do you recommend?
You can use either. What you can't do is go to your ordinary high street English solicitor because it's not their job, they wouldn't know where to start. You either use a specialist UK law firm, such as ourselves, or you go direct to a Spanish lawyer. Now, there are some pros and cons here. In our case, for example, we have half a dozen Spanish lawyers working in our offices in the UK, so really you are using a Spanish lawyer, but you're using it through an English law firm. The advantage of the English lawyer is, first of all, that they speak your language. Second, they are judged by our standards when it comes to the question of negligence. And third, they carry insurance of a much greater magnitude than any Spanish lawyer would carry. So there is, for many of our clients, a lot of comfort doing it that way. In terms of cost, there's normally not very much in it. In terms of the advantages of the Spanish lawyer, then they are on the ground and they are known to the local land registry, to the local judge or whoever it may be. And so for some jobs, it makes a great deal more sense to use a Spanish lawyer, for example, if you're doing a court case. But for buying a house, it's really your choice.
Isn't it the case that sometimes you're not going to get a sort of a rounded bit of advice from a Spanish lawyer?
I think that most Spanish lawyers, not surprisingly, don't understand anything about English law. So they can't really advise you on the interaction between the two legal systems. So when it comes to deciding, for example, the best ownership structure, they will advise you what's the best ownership structure from the Spanish perspective, but it may be plain suicidal for someone who is resident in this country. Classic example is buying through a limited company. If you do that and you have personal use of the property, the British taxman will say, that's a benefit in kind. That property rents out for £1,000 a week. You used it for 10 weeks, £10,000, 40%, please. So the Spanish lawyer will tend not to have that international perspective, and that certainly is a factor to take into account.
Great stuff. Another question, please.
How will I know that I will be entitled to a mortgage in Spain, please?
Good question. The eligibility test for mortgages in Spain is very different from the test in this country. In this country, we tend to work on multipliers of salaries or some variant of that. In Spain, they tend to work on what they call the affordability test. And what they do is they look at your salary, you and your husband or partner's salary each month. They take the net amount of that salary after tax and national insurance, and they say that you really shouldn't be paying out more than 30, 32, 33, 35% of your salary by way of miscellaneous long-term financial commitments. So if your salary is £10,000 a month, keep it nice and simple, 30% of that is £3,000 a month. If you've already got a mortgage here of £1,500 a month, you'd only be able to borrow another £1,500 worth in Spain. Because of the complexity, it's often a good idea to get a mortgage offer before you go looking at houses. And that's very simple to do. We simply contact a Spanish bank or Spanish mortgage broker, and they will come up with a provisional offer saying, yes, on the circumstances you've outlined to us, we would be prepared to lend you this amount of money.
We're seeing an increasing number of UK-based lenders doing mortgages for Spanish purchases. I mean, what's the process in terms of applying for those mortgages?
Yeah, the UK-based lender is essentially not a UK-based lender. For example, if you deal with Barclays Bank, you're dealing with Barclays Spain, which is an independent company, not Barclays London. And the Barclays Bank in Spain will apply the same rules that a Spanish bank will apply because the law requires them to do so.
Right, OK. Thanks for clarifying that. Another question, please.
John, what checks do you carry out when you act for someone buying an apartment in Spain? Are they the same checks that you would do in England?
No, they're not the same as we do in England. In England, we have a history of lawyers getting involved in property transactions that goes back for hundreds of years. And so over the years, a whole series of rather formulaic questions have been devised to find out everything possibly to be found out about a property. You don't ask those questions in Spain. If you did, they'd be completely ignored. It's just not part of the culture. What we do is, as closely as possible, we replicate those checks. So, for example, we will always check whether the seller owns the property, whether there are any debts registered against it, whether it's got planning consent, building license. If it's an apartment, we'll look at the community rules for the apartment, and so on and so on and so on. But they're not the same checks as we would make in this country, and they cannot be.
That sort you out. Great. Anybody else got a question?
Yeah. How much, realistically, do you think I can make out of a property investment in Spain?
All our clients ask us that.
The $64,000 question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Long as a
and
piece of string.
It won't surprise you to hear that it all depends. If you buy well, in other words, the right property in the right location, at the lower end of the range, and I mean really anything less than, say, 300,000 sterling, we would expect you to see a rental yield of probably in the order of 5%, maybe 6% if you're lucky. How much you'll make in rental yield depends very much on how active you are yourself, because however good your agent on the spot, they will only find you a number of weeks. But if you have your own little website and you go around your family and your friends and your workmates and your neighbours and you put a sign up in the supermarket, you can add 6, 7, 8 weeks to that, which completely transforms the economics and gets your levels up to a decent level. In terms of capital growth, which is what most of our clients are interested in, it's even more variable. The days when you would get 20, 25% capital growth in Spain every year, I think, are well and truly over, barring in certain exceptional circumstances. I think what we're seeing in Spain now is a mature market, like the British market, like the French market, where we can realistically expect to see ongoing growth of in the order of 5, 6, 7, 10% a year over a sort of 15, 20-year period. Won't be the same every year. Of course, some years it'll go up, some years down, but I think that's the sort of pattern we should see.
And you really should be looking at property as a medium to long-term investment, shouldn't you? Another question, please.
Yeah. Hi. Could you tell me how much I'm looking to put aside for legal fees and any other charges if I buy a property in Spain?
It depends a bit on the type of property you're buying, and also it depends a bit on where you're buying it. most of Spain has very similar taxes, but in certain areas, particularly the Canary Islands, the taxes are slightly different. But as a general rule, you need to allow about 11% of the price of a resale property for miscellaneous fees and taxes, and that includes 7% tax paid to the government, so that's the vast majority of it. In the case of a new property, it's roughly the same amount, but the complexity is that in some parts of Spain, the 7% tax, which is a different tax, but it's still 7%, is included in the price advertised to you. Normally it's not. Normally you see a price of 300,000 euros, and that means it's 300,000 euros plus taxes. But in one or two places you'll still see tax-inclusive prices advertised.
If you buy a property and it's, say, like an off-plan property, do you pay IVA or the tax on the full amount when you buy it, or is it just on the amount that you pay in terms of the deposit?
No, you pay tax on the full value as declared in the title deed, and hence the tendency to under-declare. But these days there are checks in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So basically you pay the 7% tax on the value that you're paying for the property.
When you buy it, initially?
When you buy it,
yeah.
Yes.
Just time for another...
Well, when you sign the title.
When you sign the title deeds, yeah. When you... sorry, a couple more quick questions?
Yes, hello. Does everything you said here today, does that apply to buying a property in Tenerife?
Broadly, yes. As I said earlier on, Spain is a collection of self-governing regions, and there are certain aspects of life which are governed by the laws of that region. And so certain taxes are a little different in the Canary Islands, and also in certain parts of Spain, not only are there differences in taxes, but also difference in the laws relating to the family, so inheritance rights can be a bit different. But in principle, 99% of what I've said will apply throughout Spain and the islands.
Great stuff. One last question.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
What would be the main danger I should be looking out for when buying a property?
I think there are three main dangers. First of all, not making sure that everything you've been told about the property is true. Secondly, not getting the legal ownership right, because that will cost you a great deal of money in unnecessary tax. And third, not sorting out the finances properly, which again can cost you a lot of wasted money.
What's the biggest pickle you've had to sort of dig somebody out of, John?
Oh, which of the hundreds? I think the biggest one that I've had to dig someone out of was a man who phoned me one day to say that he'd bought a house in Spain and that he decided he didn't want it and what was going to happen. And he seemed very certain about his problem, and so I said, well, have you signed a contract? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what did the contract say was going to happen? He says, I don't know, we're all in Spanish. So I thought, fine. Have you paid a deposit? Yes, I paid £15,000 deposit. It's a £150,000 house. Well, clearly he's probably going to lose his deposit and could be worse. So he sends me the paperwork, and I have to phone him back and I say, look, there's two bits of problem here. First of all, this is not a £150,000 house. This is £180,000. In the small print, you owe them another £30,000 when they finish landscaping the gardens. And secondly, this house is in Portugal.
Oh, that is bad.
He didn't know what country he was in.
Well, thank you, John. Listen, that's all we've got time for today. If you've got any questions, give us a call now on 0800 310 1444 or visit the website overseaspropertytv.com, and we'll see you next time.